Let the woman take her shot, then kill every single one of them. Victor Kane said it without looking up. His knife was still buried in the interpreter's chest. He pulled it out slowly, deliberately, the way a man removes a splinter. No emotion, no hesitation, just mechanics. The body dropped. Kane stepped over it, pressed his radio to his lips, and looked across the valley toward the American ridgeline. He had planned this for 8 months. He had studied their unit, their protocols, their shooter. He had studied Maya Bennett specifically because Kane knew something Commander Walker did not know. Something the entire SEAL team did not know. The 247-meter shot was never the mission. Maya was. If this story moves something inside you, if you believe that courage and loyalty still means something in this world, please subscribe to this channel right now. Hit the notification bell and stay with me until the very last word. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story can travel. The bullet left the barrel before anyone on the ridge heard the trigger break. That was the thing about a shot at this kind of distance. The sound came late. The consequence arrived first. The air moved in ways that had nothing to do with wind or weather, and every man on that mountain ridge hardened. Decorated combat tested stopped breathing at exactly the same moment. Commander Ethan Walker had the binoculars pressed so hard against his orbital bones that the rubber left a mark he would still feel 3 days later. His jaw was set. His hands, which had not trembled in 20 years of combat, were perfectly still. But something behind his eyes had shifted. Something that no mission briefing, no training exercise, no decorated career in naval special warfare had ever prepared him for. He lowered the binoculars. He looked at her. She had not moved. Maya Bennett was lying completely still, behind the suppressed .50 caliber rifle, her cheek resting against the stock, her right eye still pressed to the scope, her breathing so controlled and so quiet that the man lying 6 feet to her left, Chief Marcus Reed, the best long-range shooter in their entire unit, had almost forgotten she was there during the 31 minutes she had been waiting for this moment. Almost. Walker counted the seconds in his head. 1, 2, 3. He got to 9 before his radio operator specialist Danny Cho made a sound that was not quite a word. It was the sound a human being makes when something they have witnessed with their own eyes still refuses to be believed by their brain. Then the confirmation came across the secondary frequency. 3 words. Target is down. Nobody cheered. Nobody moved. Not because they doubted the shot. In 31 minutes of watching Maya Bennett lie behind that rifle in 38-degree mountain air, with crosswind gusts that changed direction 4 times in a heat shimmer, rising off the valley floor that made everything below them look like a hallucination. In all of that, not one of them had doubted that if she pulled the trigger, she would hit what she was aiming at. No, nobody moved because of what she said next. She did not lower the rifle. Her eyes stayed at the scope. Her voice came out quiet and completely without drama, the way a person speaks when they are telling you something they are absolutely certain about and they need you to understand it immediately. Commander, her voice was steady. That was not our real target. Walker took exactly 1 step forward. Say that again. The man I just shot was a decoy. She still had not moved. Al-Karim was never in that compound. He positioned a double. He wanted us to confirm the kill and pull out. Now she moved just slightly, shifting the rifle 3 degrees to the northeast up along the opposite ridge. The real target has been watching us from over there for the past 11 minutes. The silence that followed was the kind that happens not when people have nothing to say, but when every possible thing that could be said seems completely inadequate to the moment. Marcus Reed moved first. He brought his own spotting scope up in one smooth motion and pressed it to his eye. 3 seconds later, he exhaled through his nose. Walker, Reed said quietly. She's right. Walker looked at Reed. Reed looked at Walker. And in that exchange between 2 men who had spent a combined 37 years hunting some of the most dangerous individuals on Earth was the wordless, instantaneous recognition that everything they thought they knew about this mission had just changed. What are we looking at? Walker said. Second firing position, Reed said. Northeast ridge, rock formation at about 11 o'clock from our current bearing. Somebody set it up. Good concealment. Professional concealment. He paused. Military-grade concealment. How long has someone been in that position? Reed turned and looked at Maya. She finally lowered the rifle. She sat up slowly, not because she was tired, but because she was being deliberate about every single movement. She pulled the data card from her shooter's log and handed it to Walker without being asked. "Since before we arrive, she said." Walker took the card. He looked at it. Then he looked at her, really looked at her for the first time since she had joined the operation 48 hours ago. Maya Bennett was 28 years old and looked every one of those years in the way that people who have done difficult things in difficult places tend to look their age without looking worn out. She was not small. She was not imposing. She was the kind of person you would pass in a hallway and assess as competent and professional and then immediately forget because she gave you nothing extra to hold on to. No performance, no edge, no attempt to make an impression. Her father had been the same way. Colonel Daniel Bennett had been one of the most decorated Marine Scout snipers in the history of a branch of military service that did not hand out decorations casually. He had served 3 decades and trained generations of long-range marksmen and spent the last years of his career writing doctrine that was still used in training programs that bore other people's names because Daniel Bennett had never been interested in credit. He had been interested in results. He had died 14 months ago, prostate cancer, not a bullet, not a bomb, cancer, the kind of death that felt wrong for a man who had survived things that should have killed him a dozen times over. Maya had been at his bedside in the VA hospital in San Diego when he passed, and the last thing he had said to her, not the last thing he whispered, but the last thing he said clearly in a full voice looking directly at her was this: "You know when to wait. That is the thing they will never be able to teach anyone else. Don't let them rush you." She had not let them rush her. Not once. Not in the 18 months since she had transferred from support operations into special warfare. Not in the evaluations. Not in the qualification runs. Not in the 3 separate occasions when senior male operators had questioned in increasingly polite and therefore increasingly condescending ways whether her assignment to a direct action SEAL unit represented the best use of their tactical resources. Not even here, not today. Not when Reed had checked his watch twice during her 31-minute hold and Walker had stood 10 feet away with his binoculars and said nothing but communicated volumes with the exact angle of his shoulders. She had waited, and she had been right. But right now, the rightness of the shot mattered considerably less than what was happening on that northeast ridge. "How many?" Walker said. "One that I can confirm," Maya said. "The position is set up for a single shooter." She paused. "But I want you to understand something, Commander. This person didn't set up that position to shoot at Al-Karim's people. The angle is wrong for that. The line of sight from that ridge doesn't cover the compound." Walker was already there. "It covers us." "Yes, sir." "How long have we been in the target zone?" "Since we took the ridge," she said. "About 37 minutes. Reed lowered his spotting scope. He turned and looked at the 7 other operators positioned behind them along the ridgeline. 7 men who had been standing in a potential kill zone for 37 minutes without knowing it. 7 men whose lives had depended, without their knowledge, on the fact that whoever was on that northeast ridge had not yet decided to start shooting. "Why haven't they fired?" Reed said. It was not really a question directed at anyone. It was the kind of thing you say out loud because if you don't, it builds up pressure behind your eyes. But Maya answered it anyway. "Because they're not here to kill us," she said. "They're here to watch us, to confirm what we do after the shot." She looked at Walker. "Commander, whoever is in that position, they wanted us to take out Al-Karim's double. They needed us to believe the mission was complete. They're waiting for us to report success and extract. And then what? And then they report that information to whoever they're working for." She let that sit for exactly the right amount of time. "Sir, this isn't about Al-Karim. Al-Karim is a piece on a board. Somebody moved him out of that compound and put a double in his place because they needed to know something specific." "What did they need to know?" "Whether we could take the shot." She looked at him directly. "Whether I could take the shot." The wind shifted. One of the operators further down the ridge, a big, quiet Georgian named Sergeant First Class Boone, who had said approximately 40 words total in the 2 days Maya had known him, turned and made eye contact with Reed with an expression that meant he had heard everything and was currently reassessing several assumptions simultaneously. Walker stepped back. He pulled out his encrypted satellite communicator and stared at it for a moment without activating it. "If we call in the confirmed kill," he said slowly, "we tell whoever is on that ridge exactly what they want to know." "Yes, sir." And if we don't call it in command, is going to start asking questions and we blow operational security from the other direction. Yes, sir. So what do you suggest, specialist? Maya did not hesitate, not because she had been waiting for this moment to prove something, but because she had actually thought this through before they ever reached the ridge. She had been thinking it through since the briefing 3 days ago when something in the satellite imagery had not felt right to her, and she had sat in the back of the room after everyone else left and pulled the images up again and spent 90 minutes with them before she was able to name what was bothering her. We give them what they came for, she said. We report the confirmed kill. We begin extraction protocol. We look exactly like a team that completed its mission and is going home. She reached for her rifle. And while the rest of the team moves, I stay behind and I find out exactly who is in that position and what they're carrying out of here. Alone. Yes, sir. Reed made a sound. It was not approval. It was also not outright opposition. It was the sound of a man who has just watched someone hit a target at 247 meters and is therefore no longer in a position to argue on the basis of capability alone. Walker looked at the northeast ridge. He looked at Maya. He looked at the data card still in his hand. Your father, he said, he spent time in this valley. Yes, sir, 2003 and again in 2011. I knew of him. Walker said it carefully, the way people acknowledge the dead when they are in the presence of those who loved them. He was extraordinary. He was patient, Maya said. He always said that extraordinary was just patience that other people couldn't see. Something in Walker's face changed, not softened exactly, recalibrated. How long do you need? 30 minutes. Maybe 20 if the position is where I think it is. And if they're not alone, then I need you to be close enough to hear the shot. Walker looked at Reed. Reed looked at him. 22 minutes, Reed said. We can give you 22 minutes before we have to commit to the extraction route. Maya nodded. She began moving, staying low, keeping the ridgeline between herself and the northeast position, moving with the same deliberate patience she brought to everything. She did not look back. Reed watched her go. After about 15 seconds, he said quietly, Walker. She identified a second firing position that none of us picked up during our own reconnaissance sweep. I know, Walker said. She called the decoy before the shot, before we even confirmed the target was down. I know. Reed was quiet for a moment. I've been running long-range operations for 16 years. I know that too, Marcus. And I want to say for the record that I am deeply professionally uncomfortable with the fact that a 28-year-old specialist just outthought every single one of us in a situation where being wrong means we all died on this mountain. Walker almost smiled. Noted. Also for the record, Reed continued, his voice dropping lower. She was right about waiting. I checked my watch twice. I was thinking about calling it. I know. You weren't going to stop her. Nope, Walker said. I wasn't. Reed picked up his spotting scope again and pointed it at the northeast ridge. For a long moment, he was quiet. Who do you think is up there? He said. Walker was quiet for several seconds. Then he said a name. Just a name. 2 words. And every single operator within hearing distance went very, very still. Because they all knew that name. They all knew what that name meant. And none of them, not Walker, not Reed, not Boone, not any of the 7 hardened men on that ridge who had collectively survived things that would appear in classified documents that would not be declassified for another 40 years. None of them wanted to be the first to say out loud what they were all thinking, which was this: if that name was right, then Maya Bennett was not walking toward a reconnaissance position. She was walking toward the most dangerous man any of them had ever encountered, and she was doing it alone. 22 minutes. The wind came off the mountain in a long, cold gust that moved through the ridge line and died in the valley below. Reed kept his scope on the northeast ridge. Walker kept his eyes on Maya's retreating figure until she crested a rock formation and disappeared. And then there was nothing to do but count the seconds and hope and wait. The valley was quiet again. But not the peaceful kind of quiet, the kind that comes right before something breaks. Maya moved along the backside of the ridge, with her body low and her mind completely clear. She had learned this from her father, not the physical technique of moving through terrain, although he had taught her that too in hours-long sessions on the hills behind their home in Oceanside that started when she was 11 years old and did not stop until she shipped out for her first assignment. Know what she had learned from him that no manual could teach and no instructor could replicate was the mental state that serious work required. Silence inside, not emptiness, silence. There was a difference. Emptiness was what happened when you tried to force your mind to go blank, and all you got was static and anxiety and the feeling that you were about to make a mistake. Silence was what happened when you let everything settle, the fear, the doubt, the awareness of consequences, the knowledge of what you were walking toward, and you let it all be present without letting any of it become loud. Her father had called it the still water. He said it was the thing that separated shooters who were technically excellent from shooters who were actually dangerous. Because a technically excellent shooter in a high-pressure situation would start calculating what they stood to lose. A truly dangerous shooter would simply be present. Maya was present. She moved across the terrain with practiced efficiency, reading the ground the way her father had taught her, not as an obstacle to cross, but as a language to interpret. Every rock, every depression, every seam in the earth told her something. The northeast ridge was approximately 340 meters from her current position. She was working with the terrain using the natural contours to stay below the sight line of anyone positioned at the elevation she was targeting. She had studied this valley, not just for this mission. She had studied it the way you study something you know is going to matter, because her father had studied it too. And in the last year of his life, when he could not sleep and the cancer made everything difficult, he would spread his maps on the kitchen table and walk her through positions, angles, sight lines, elevation changes, and terrain features as if he were still in the field. As if the valley were a classroom and the classroom had never closed. She had thought it was therapy for him, a way to stay connected to a life he was leaving behind. She understood now that it was something else entirely. He had known she would come here, not this mission specifically, but something like this, a moment like this, a valley like this. He had known it the way fathers who have spent their lives in serious work know what waits for the people they love, and so he had prepared her. She stopped behind a boulder and pressed herself against it, checking her angles before moving again, 180 meters to go. The wind up here was sharper, more direct, coming off the peak to her northwest in irregular bursts that she had already cataloged and adjusted for in her head. She thought about what Walker had said, that name. She had heard it too. She had very good ears. And Walker had not been speaking particularly quietly, and the name had reached her just as she was cresting the first rock formation. She did not let herself react to it in the moment. Her body kept moving. Her face stayed neutral, her breathing stayed controlled, but the name had landed somewhere inside her with a weight that she was going to have to reckon with. Victor Kane. She had heard that name for the first time when she was 14 years old, spoken in her father's voice on a phone call that she was not supposed to be listening to. She had heard it a second time 2 years later in a conversation between her father and a man who came to the house and sat at the kitchen table and did not introduce himself and left 40 minutes later without looking at her once. She had heard it a third time on the day she transferred into special warfare. In the classified background brief her new commanding officer had given her in a section that was marked with a level of classification that made very clear that almost no one was supposed to know what was in it. Victor Kane was not a myth. That was the important thing to understand. Every special operations community developed myths, ghost stories about enemy combatants who had transcended the normal limits of human skill and become something more like a force of nature. Most of those myths were exaggerated, built from pieces of real events, and inflated by the way fear turns the human imagination loose in the dark. Kane was not exaggerated, and he had been real when he was American. He had been exceptional, genuinely, verifiably exceptional in ways that his service record documented with the blunt, emotionless language of military bureaucracy. He had been, by any credible measure, one of the 3 or 4 finest long-range shooters the United States military had produced in the past 30 years. And then something had happened. The classified brief had given her the bare outline. The full story, the why and the how, was known only to people with clearances that made hers look unremarkable. But the basics were available to her, and the basics were enough to understand what she was dealing with. Kane had crossed over, not gradually, not as the result of some slow moral erosion, but decisively with what every subsequent investigation had described as a coldly rational set of motivations that were perhaps more frightening than passion or ideology would have been. He had sold specific technical knowledge to specific people for specific sums of money, And then he had gone to work for those people, not as an advisor, not as a contractor in the margins, but as an operational asset. He had spent the past 7 years training enemy marksmen in 4 different countries. He had spent the past 7 years building a philosophy, if you could call it that, around the idea that skill was the only true currency, that loyalty was a weakness that the powerful imposed on the less powerful, and that anyone who allowed sentiment to interfere with precision was simply a lesser version of themselves. He was 46 years old. I was by every assessment more dangerous now than he had been when he was American. And Maya's father had known him, not known about him, known him, had served alongside him in a previous era before Cain had become what he was, had seen something in him even then, something that her father had described in one of his rare moments of absolute candor as a fundamental confusion about what power was for. He could do things I couldn't do, her father had said. They were sitting on the back porch in Oceanside a Saturday evening, her mother inside watching television. Maya, 16 years old and already understanding that conversations like this one were rare and should be paid attention to. And he knew it, and it meant too much to him. Knowing it, that was his problem, not the skill, the relationship with the skill. She had asked him what he meant. Some people pick up a rifle and they think it makes them something, her father had said. He held his own hands out in front of him and looked at them like they were an object he was examining. And some people pick up a rifle and they think it gives them a responsibility. Cain was always the first kind. Most of the first kind learn eventually. They figure out what the responsibility means. He lowered his hands. Cain just got better. The better he got, the more he believed that the skill was the point, that the skill was its own justification. He paused. I knew he'd go wrong, I just didn't know which direction. She had thought about that conversation many times in the years since. She was thinking about it now, working her way across the backside of the northeast ridge 90 meters from where her instincts told her the position was moving quietly, moving carefully, not rushing, not hesitating, just moving. Because whatever Cain believed about skill and power and justification, she understood something that he apparently did not. The distance between two snipers on a mountain was not just a matter of meters. It was a matter of what you were willing to wait for. And Maya Bennett had been waiting for this her entire life. She stopped. She pressed her back against the rock face and closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, she turned her head slowly to the left. 60 meters. There. A slight disturbance in the natural pattern of the terrain. Something that was almost perfectly camouflaged would have been perfectly camouflaged to most observers. But her father had taught her what perfect camouflage looked like from a distance, and he had taught her that the tell was never the camouflage itself. The tell was always the angles. Living things, human beings, positioning themselves for optimal sight lines, created angles that did not occur naturally in rock and earth and mountain vegetation. This angle was wrong. This angle meant there was someone there. She controlled her breathing. She assessed the situation in the way her father had drilled into her, not panicking forward, not retreating backward, but simply being present with what was real. She was alone. She was 60 meters from a man who was arguably the most dangerous shooter in the world. She had a sidearm and a combat knife and the knowledge she had spent 28 years accumulating. She also had something else. She had the fact that he did not know where she was. He knew she existed. He had been watching the ridge through a scope for the past 40 minutes or more. He had watched her make the shot. He had watched her team. He had been doing exactly what she said he was doing, confirming, gathering, preparing to report. But he did not know that she had left the team. He did not know she was 60 meters away. And in a contest between two people who understood the art of waiting, the person who moved first almost always lost. Maya settled against the rock. She looked at the position. She controlled her breathing. And she waited. 40 meters away in a firing position that he had spent 6 hours preparing and that he was confident was invisible to any reconnaissance asset the Americans were likely to deploy. Victor Cain lay behind his rifle and watched the SEAL team on the opposite ridge begin to move. He had watched them for 53 minutes. He had watched the woman make the shot. He had felt something just briefly, just for a fraction of a second, that he had not felt in years. Surprise. Not at the distance. He had known from the briefing he had been given before this operation that Maya Bennett was capable of the shot. He had studied her the same way he studied all of his assignments. She was not unknown to him. But the patience, the 31-minute hold, the stillness, that had surprised him because that level of stillness was not something that was trained. That was something inherited. He recognized it. He pressed his eye back to his scope and watched the SEAL team begin their extraction movement. He noted the positions, the direction, the spacing between operators. He began composing the report he would transmit in 30 minutes from a secondary position 3 kilometers from here. He did not notice that one of the operators was not in the extraction group. He was not looking for her. I was not looking for her because in 46 years of professional life, Victor Kane had never operated on the assumption that he was the one being hunted. That was the thing about people who believed that skill was its own justification. It made them predictable. Maya moved. She had 40 meters between herself and Victor Kane, and she was using every single one of them. Maya moved along the rock face with her back pressed flat against the stone, her breathing reduced to the absolute minimum. Her body would allow her right hand resting on the grip of her sidearm without drawing it. Drawing it would make noise. Noise would end this before it started. And the one thing Maya needed right now, the one tactical advantage she had in a situation where every other variable was stacked against her, was that Kane did not know she was there. 40 meters. She counted her steps the way her father had taught her, not by number but by weight. Every footfall was a decision. Every shift of her body was a calculation. The mountain rock beneath her boots was irregular, which was a problem, but it was also cold, which kept the ambient noise down, which was the only reason she was still invisible to a man who had spent decades learning how to hear the things that other people couldn't hear. 35 meters. She stopped. She heard something. It was not a sound exactly. It was the absence of a sound that had been there a moment before. The wind coming off the peak had been producing a low, consistent pressure against the rock face, not loud, barely perceptible, but consistent, and now it had stopped. And in the silence that followed, Maya understood with complete certainty that the person in that firing position had just moved. She pressed herself against the rock and went completely still. 3 seconds passed. 5, 8. Then Kane's voice came not through a radio, not transmitted, but actual physical present, coming from 40 meters away, or possibly less, spoken in a tone that was so calm it was almost conversational. "You're better than I expected." Maya did not move. "Your father was better than I expected too the first time." A pause. He got faster later, after he learned to stop being surprised by what he was capable of. She identified the direction, slightly left of where she had originally placed the position. He had shifted, not much, maybe 2 meters, but he had shifted, which meant he had known she was coming before she got there, or he had heard something in the past 30 seconds that told him she was close. Either way, the tactical picture had just changed completely. She pulled her hand away from the sidearm. Drawing it now would tell him exactly where she was. What she needed was information. How far had he shifted? Was he still behind the rifle? Or had he gone to a sidearm himself? Was this a provocation, talking to draw a response? Or was he genuinely uncertain of her exact position? She needed him to keep talking. "You studied me," she said. She kept her voice level and projected it slightly left of her actual position, a technique her father had taught her in the backyard in Oceanside when she was 13 years old, and that she had never once had to use in the field until this moment. "Extensively," Kane said. The direction of his voice confirmed it. He was tracking where she had projected, not where she actually was. 2-meter advantage. Small, but real. "You're Daniel's daughter in every way that matters. The patience especially, that's not trainable. You understand that. Most people don't. You sound like you admired him." "I did," Kane said without any hesitation. "Daniel Bennett was the finest natural shooter I ever encountered. Better than me technically in 3 or 4 specific situations that mattered." Another pause. He was also profoundly limited by what he believed the skill was for. He believed it was for protecting people. "Yes," Kane said, "that's the limitation I'm describing." Maya shifted 2 inches to her left. Slow, completely controlled. She was building a picture, his position, his angle, the geometry of what she was working with. The rock face gave her partial concealment, but not cover. If he knew within 4 or 5 meters where she was, a single shot would end the conversation permanently. She needed to move him. "Walk me through the operation," she said. "Not because I'll let you leave, I won't, but because you want someone to understand it." That's why you're talking. The silence that followed was approximately 4 seconds long. You're trying to get me to talk long enough to fix my position, Kane said. And you're right that I want someone to understand it. Those two things are both true simultaneously. She could hear something in his voice that was almost amusement. You really are his daughter. Tell me about the double, she said, moving again while she spoke, masking her footfall under the sound of her own voice. Al-Karim was never in that compound. You set it up. Al-Karim set it up, Kane corrected. I advise. There's a difference. He's a careful man. He understood that the Americans had developed a specific capability, and he wanted to know how reliable that capability was before he made his next move. And the capability was me. The capability, Kane said, was your father's methodology applied by someone young enough and disciplined enough to take it operational. His voice shifted slightly. She caught it almost nothing, the acoustic signature of a body adjusting position. He was moving too, slowly but moving. The shot confirmed it. 247 meters mountain crosswind, 31-minute hold. Al-Karim needed to know that was real. Why? Because his next operation involves a target that can only be reached at that distance. Kane's voice was smooth and completely without guilt, the voice of a man explaining a business transaction. He needed to know if the Americans could stop it. Now he knows they can, which changes his planning. Maya processed this in real time. The mission had not been a trap to kill the team. It had been a test, a live fire evaluation, using real American operators as the test instruments to determine a single data point that Al-Karim needed for his next move. The entire operation, the compound, the double cane on the ridge, was intelligence collection, and she had given them exactly what they came for. She stopped moving. You're about 12 meters to my left, Kane said conversationally. Closer to the rock face than I initially placed you. You move extremely well. 12 meters. If he was right, the geometry was dangerous. She needed lateral distance between them, and she needed it now. You're not going to shoot me, she said, moving right as she spoke, keeping her voice stationary while her body went the other direction. I'm not, Kane agreed. Not yet, not here. Because you want the conversation. Because you came alone and your team doesn't know exactly where you are. And if I shoot you now, I have 30 seconds to clear this position before Walker sends everything he has across this ridge. A pause. And because I want the conversation, both things. She had moved 8 meters to his right. She stopped. She looked at the position from her new angle, and she saw him clearly for the first time. Victor Kane was lying behind a long-range precision rifle in a firing position that was objectively immaculate. He was approximately 46 years old, which she knew from his file, but what the file had not conveyed and what she was registering now was the quality of his stillness. Even in conversation, even while tracking her movement with his voice, his body was arranged against the earth with a kind of disciplined quietness that she recognized immediately and viscerally because she had grown up watching it. Her father had looked exactly like that behind a rifle. The recognition hit her somewhere she had not expected to be hit, and she spent exactly 1/2 second feeling it before she let it move through her and settle into the silence her father had called still water. Kane turned his head slightly and looked at her. Not through his scope, with his naked eye. He had known where she was. He had known for at least the past minute. I gave you the conversation, he said, because I want you to understand what happens next, not for your sake, for his. He meant her father. She understood that immediately. Daniel deserves to have his daughter understand what she walked into. I understand exactly what I walked into, Maya said. No, Kane said, and his voice shifted into something that was not quite hardness and not quite pity. You understand the tactical picture. You don't understand the strategic one. He reached into his jacket slowly, deliberately, making very clear with his movements that he was not going for a weapon, and removed a small metal case. He set it on the rock in front of him and pushed it 3 feet in her direction. There's a drive in there, he said, encrypted. The decryption key is your father's service number. He's the only person I trusted to build that key around, because he's the only person I trusted to have taught someone patient enough to eventually reach this position. Maya did not move toward it. What's on the drive? Everything, Kane said simply. Al-Karim's actual target, his timeline, his network inside your organization, because there is a network, and it goes higher than you think, and it has been operating for longer than anyone has been willing to admit. He looked at her steadily. I have spent 3 years building that intelligence. I'm giving it to you. The silence stretched. You're giving me intelligence. She let the skepticism be completely audible. After you spent 8 months helping them test whether I could make a kill shot. Yes, that's not how this works. I know how it looks, Kane said. I know what you think I am. I know what your file on me says. I know that every instinct your father gave you is telling you right now that this is a manipulation. He paused. Some of it is. I won't pretend otherwise. I needed you here specifically because you're the only person I was willing to give this to. And getting you here required the operation. You used my team as bait. I used the mission as a delivery mechanism, Kane said. Your team was never in danger from me. I had no intention of firing on them. The decoy was in danger, Maya said, the man I shot. Something moved across Kane's face. It was brief and she almost missed it. Yes, he said. He was. You set up a man to die to get me on this mountain. Al-Karim set up the man. I advised the operation. He said it again, the same distinction he had drawn before, and this time she heard what was underneath it. Not justification exactly, but the particular form of rationalization that people use when they have done something they know is wrong and have been living with it long enough that they have learned to carry the weight without letting it show. That's still his blood, Maya said. Kane was quiet. You know it is, she said. That's why you built the key around my father's number. Is on number, because somewhere in there, under everything you've told yourself about skill and intelligence and strategy, my father would have called this exactly what it is. The wind came back. It moved between them for a moment. Kane looked at the metal case. Take the drive, he said. Whatever you think of me, and you're not wrong about most of it, take the drive. What's on it will save lives. More lives than the one that was spent getting you here. And then what, you walk away. I disappear, Kane said, which is not the same thing. You'll spend the next 2 years trying to find me again. You probably will eventually. You have his patience. For the first time, something in his voice became something other than controlled, something that sounded almost against his will, like grief. I spent 20 years becoming the best at this, and somewhere in the past 3, I started doing the math differently. The shot is still perfect. The target selection became unacceptable. He looked at her. Your father would tell you that's a distinction without a difference. He'd be mostly right. Maya looked at the metal case. She looked at Kane. She thought about what was on that ridge behind her, Walker Reed, 6 other operators, a mission that had just become something exponentially more complicated than what they had been briefed on. She thought about the man she had shot an hour ago, the double, who had stood in a compound because someone had told him to stand there and had died because of it. She thought about Al-Karim moving in the darkness, somewhere recalibrating his plans based on what he had learned today. She thought about her father at the kitchen table, spreading maps across the wood, his voice patient and precise and never rushed. You said the network goes higher than anyone is willing to admit, she said. Yes. How high? Kane was quiet for a moment. High enough, he said, that the people who are supposed to investigate it are the people who are protecting it. The coldness that moved through her was not the mountain air. Give me a name, she said. The drive has the name, Kane said. Oh, 3 names actually, with documentation. He paused. One of them is in your chain of command. The silence that followed that statement was the longest silence of the entire conversation. Maya reached down and picked up the metal case. She did not take her eyes off Kane while she did it. He did not move while she did it. 2 shooters 10 feet apart on a mountain ridge, both of them still. Both of them reading each other with the particular precision that their training and their inheritance had given them. My father would have arrested you, she said. Yes, Kane said. He would have. He would have found a way to use the intelligence and still arrested you. I know. Something that was almost a smile. That's why I made sure he was dead before I tried this approach. The words landed like a physical impact. Maya felt them in her chest, not anger, not immediately, but something harder and deeper and more dangerous than anger. Her voice stayed completely level. What did you just say? Kane looked at her, and for the first time in the entire conversation, she saw something in his eyes that was not control, not calculation, not the smooth professional management of a man who had spent 46 years making sure nothing could touch him. It looked like regret. Your father was not supposed to know about the operation, Kane said quietly. He found out. The cancer gave us options we didn't intend. He stopped. He was dying anyway. Maya, I need you to hear that. He was dying. The cancer was terminal. What happened, what was done accelerated something that was already happening. The mountain was completely silent. Every sound had stopped. Say that clearly, Maya said. Her voice was a tone she had never used in her life. Not rage, something below rage, something fundamental. Say exactly what you mean. Your father did not die from prostate cancer alone, Kane said. There were people who could not afford for him to live long enough to talk about what he had discovered. Those people made sure the timeline was shorter than it would have been naturally. He held her gaze. Those people are on the drive. The case was in her left hand. Her right hand was at her sidearm. She had not drawn it. If you draw that weapon, Kane said very quietly, you lose the drive, you lose the intelligence, and the people who killed your father face no consequences. He didn't move. I'm not saying that as a threat. I'm saying it as a fact. The math is the same math you've been doing your whole career. Distance, wind, trajectory. You know what the right shot is here. 10 seconds passed. 20, 30. Maya's hand moved away from the sidearm. Kane exhaled through his nose. He knew about you, he said, and his voice had changed quieter now. The professional control still there, but something else underneath it, something that sounded like it had been carried for a long time. I mean, he knew what you would become. He talked about you in the time before everything. He said you were going to be better than both of us. Kane looked away for a moment out at the valley. He was right. The shot today proved it. Don't, Maya said. The word was short and hard and meant many things simultaneously. Kane nodded. He understood. He began to pack his equipment with the same methodical precision she had been watching since she first identified his position. He moved without hurry, without the anxious efficiency of someone who feared being caught, just the calm, practiced movements of a man who had been preparing to leave from the moment she arrived. The decryption key, Maya said, my father's service number. His full service number, including the prefix from his first enlistment. She knew it. She had known it since she was 9 years old. Her father had taught it to her like other fathers taught their children their phone number or their address, something you carry in case you get lost. She had not known until this moment that he had taught it to her for a different reason entirely. He had known even then. He had prepared her even then. When I get back to my team, she said, I'm going to tell Walker everything that happened on this ridge. Yes, Kane said, he's going to want to pursue you. He's welcome to try. And the name in my chain of command, she said, when I find it on that drive when this is done and the people who killed my father are accountable, I'm going to come for you too. Kane had shouldered his kit. He looked at her one last time. I know, he said. I'm counting on it. A pause. It will give me something to prepare for. I find that useful. He moved away from the position in the direction of the peak, moving with a speed and quietness that was, even knowing what she knew about him, remarkable to watch. In 30 seconds, he had used the terrain to take himself completely out of her line of sight. He was gone. Maya stood at the empty firing position for exactly 15 seconds. She looked at the valley below. She looked at the ridge where her team was. She looked at the metal case in her hand. Then she pressed her radio. Walker, she said. His voice came back immediately tight with controlled concern. Bennett, report. I'm coming back in, she said. I need everyone together. Right now. What I have to tell you cannot wait, and it cannot go on a radio. A pause. Are you injured? No. Did you make contact? Yes. Another pause, longer this time. Bennett. Walker's voice had dropped into the register he used when things had become more serious than expected. Was it Kane? She looked at the metal case one more time. Sir, she said, it was Kane, and we have a very significant problem. Multiple significant problems. She started moving back toward the team, steady, controlled, not running. Get Reed together with you. What I'm about to tell you is going to change the mission completely. She clicked off the radio. She walked. The valley below was still quiet. The sun had moved across the sky by approximately 2 hours worth of light since they had reached the ridge that morning, and the shadows were falling differently now. And somewhere in that valley, a man whose name she did not yet know had died, because someone had positioned him there for her bullet. And somewhere beyond this mountain, Kareem was receiving a confirmation that would change his plans in ways she could not yet fully trace. And somewhere in her own chain of command, Someone she might have briefed someone, she might have trusted someone who had sat in rooms with her and looked at mission plans and nodded at the right moments, was a name on a drive that was going to break something open that had been sealed for years. And her father had known all of it. He had known and he had died before he could reach her. He had done the only thing left available to him. He had prepared her. She pressed her hand briefly against the metal case. Then she kept walking. Reed was the first one she saw when she crested the ridge. He was standing apart from the others, his spotting scope still in his hand, watching her approach with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the professional skepticism he had worn for the past 2 days, not the grudging reassessment of the past 2 hours, but something that looked like genuine undisguised concern. "You're okay," he said when she reached him. It was not a question. "I'm okay," she said. "I had eyes on the position for 12 of your 22 minutes," he said. "I saw 2 people in it." "Yes." "It was Kane." "Yes." He looked at the metal case. He did not ask. Walker appeared at Reed's shoulder, and behind Walker, the other operators were moving in, closing the circle, and Maya looked at the faces of these men. The faces of people who had trusted the mission and done their jobs and had no idea yet that the ground they were standing on had shifted completely beneath their feet. She looked at Walker. "Sir," she said, "I need to tell you something about my father." Walker went very still. "And then I need to tell you something about someone in this organization." The wind came off the mountain one more time. Nobody moved. Maya Bennett opened her mouth and began to tell the truth that her father had died trying to reach her. The words came out of Maya's mouth in the order that mattered most, which was not chronological order and was not emotional order, but tactical order. The sequence that gave Walker and Reed the clearest possible picture in the shortest possible time, because they were still on a mountain in eastern Afghanistan and the luxury of processing things slowly did not exist. She told them about the conversation. She told them about the drive. She told them about Al-Karim's real purpose, not the compound, not the double, but the intelligence collection, the live fire evaluation, the data point that a terrorist commander now possessed about American long-range capability. She told them about the network Kane had described. She told them that the network had a presence inside their own organization. She did not tell them about her father. Not yet. That part required stillness she did not currently have access to, and she needed to stay functional for what came next. Walker listened to all of it without interrupting. This was one of the things she had observed about him. In 48 hours, he had the discipline to receive information completely before he responded to it. It was rarer than it should have been at his level. When she finished, he was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, "Reed." Reed said, "I heard every word." Thoughts. Reed exhaled through his nose. "Kane is the most wanted former American operative currently active in Central Asia. He just handed a piece of hardware to a 28-year-old specialist instead of disappearing into the mountains, which means either the intelligence on that drive is genuine and he has a reason to want it in American hands, or this is the most elaborate misdirection I have encountered in 16 years of this work." He paused. "I don't think it's misdirection." "Why not?" Walker said. "Because if Kane wanted to feed us false intelligence, he has 10 cleaner ways to do it that don't involve standing 40 meters from one of our operators and having a 20-minute conversation." Reed looked at Maya. "He wanted her specifically. He wanted Daniel Bennett's daughter specifically. That's not a misdirection play. That's a handoff with conditions attached." Walker looked at the metal case in Maya's hand. "The drive is encrypted." "Yes, sir." He said, "The decryption key is my father's service number." "And you know it?" "Yes, sir." Walker rubbed the back of his neck with one hand, the first physical gesture she had seen from him that looked like anything other than deliberate composure. "If there is a name in our chain of command on that drive," he said quietly, "we cannot decrypt it here. We cannot transmit it. We cannot follow normal reporting protocol because normal reporting protocol goes through the chain of command that may be compromised." He looked at Reed. "We have a problem." "We have several problems," Reed said. "In order of urgency, we are still in the field. Our mission is officially complete. Per the decoy, kill our extraction, window closes in 40 minutes, and we are carrying a piece of intelligence that could detonate careers and possibly prosecutions at a level neither of us has operational authority to handle." He stopped. "That's before we address the part where Kane told Bennett that her father's death was accelerated." The circle of operators around them had gone very, very quiet. Boone, the big Georgian who never spoke, turned his head slowly and looked at Maya with an expression that was entirely unambiguous. It was not pity, it was the particular solidarity of a combat soldier who has just understood that one of their own has been carrying something enormous without anyone knowing. Maya felt it land but kept her face still. "We extract on schedule," Walker said. "We say nothing on any radio that we are not willing to have intercepted. We get back to the forward operating base, and we find a room with no recording equipment and no personnel who were not on this ridge today, and then we open the drive." He looked at Maya. "Can you do that? Hold this for 40 minutes. "I've been holding it for 14 months, she said. 40 minutes is manageable." Something moved across Walker's face. It was brief, and he controlled it immediately, but she caught it the same thing she had seen in Reed when she came back over the ridge. Something that looked like shame. Not personal guilt, but the institutional variety. The recognition that something had happened to someone under the broad umbrella of their organization's authority, and that the organization had not protected her. "Bennett," Walker said, "Sir, whatever is on that drive, whatever we find, I want you to know that this team is with you." He said it simply, without performance. "All the way through." She nodded once. That was all she trusted herself to do in that moment. They moved. The extraction took 38 minutes from ridge to helicopter landing zone, and Maya spent those 38 minutes in the particular mental state she associated with serious waiting, not empty, not anxious, just present. She tracked the terrain. She watched the movement of the team around her. She held the metal case in her left hand and kept her right hand free. Nobody spoke more than was necessary. The helicopter was loud and cold and smelled like hydraulic fluid and the particular metallic smell of military equipment that had been in and out of high-altitude environments for too many rotations. Maya sat against the fuselage wall with the case in her lap and looked at nothing. Reed sat across from her. At some point during the flight, he leaned forward slightly, not enough to be obvious to anyone watching, just enough to close the distance between them, and said loud enough to be heard over the rotor noise. "Your father trained me. 2 weeks 2014 at a range in Nevada. I never told you that." Maya looked at him. "I was the most patient instructor I ever had," Reed said. "He stopped me 17 times in 2 weeks. Every time I was about to rush a shot. Every single time he knew before I did." He leaned back. "I should have recognized it in you from the first briefing. I apologize for the time it took me." She held his gaze for a moment. "He would have said the time was fine," she said. "He always said you couldn't rush understanding either." Reed almost smiled. Almost. The forward operating base received them with the bureaucratic efficiency of a system that had processed thousands of returning operators and had learned to make the mechanics smooth so that the humans inside the mechanics could focus on the parts that were not smooth. Weapons cleared equipment, logged preliminary debrief scheduled for 1800 hours. Walker diverted from the preliminary debrief scheduling with a quiet word to the base operations officer that resulted in a room, a small windowless room that was used for equipment storage and had not been swept for recording devices because nobody had previously considered it a space where sensitive conversations would occur, which made it paradoxically the most secure room on the base. 7 people went into that room. Walker, Reed, Maya Boone, and 3 other operators from the Ridge Sergeant Torres Specialist Kwan, and a quiet, precise woman named Petty Officer Delacroix, who had said almost nothing during the mission, but who Maya had noticed missed nothing either. Walker closed the door. "Before we open the drive," he said, "I want everyone in this room to understand what we are about to do and what it means. If the intelligence Kane provided is genuine, and if there is a name in our chain of command on this drive, then from the moment we read that name, we are operating outside normal protocol. We cannot report up the chain. We cannot follow standard procedures. We are going to have to be extremely careful and extremely smart about every subsequent step." He looked around the room. "If anyone wants to leave before we open this, leave now. No judgment. What I'm describing is not a comfortable position." Nobody moved. Boone, who had said perhaps 50 words total since Maya met him, said, "Open the drive, Commander." Walker looked at Maya. She pulled the laptop from the equipment shelf. It was old, it was not networked, it was exactly the kind of hardware you used when you needed to look at something without it touching any connected system. She inserted the drive. The encryption prompt appeared immediately. She typed her father's service number, the full version including the prefix from his first enlistment, the version she had been carrying in her memory since she was 9 years old. The drive opened. The room went very quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when the people in them are reading something that is changing their understanding of the world in real time. The drive contained 3 categories of material. The first was operational intelligence on Al-Karim, his actual current location, which was not in Afghanistan, his real timeline, which was shorter than anyone had assessed, and his actual target, which was not a military installation and was not in this region, in which when Walker read it aloud in a careful, controlled voice, made Torres close his eyes and press his lips together and make a sound that was not quite a word. The second category was the network documentation, names, dates, financial records, communication logs. Kane had spent 3 years building it, and the construction was meticulous. The work of someone who understood intelligence tradecraft at the highest level and had applied that understanding with the specific goal of making the product undeniable. There were 3 names. Walker read the first 2. They were significant, genuinely significant, the kind of names that would generate federal investigations and congressional testimony and news coverage that would last years. The room processed them with the controlled seriousness of people who understood exactly what they were looking at. Then Walker read the 3rd name. Reed said, "Say that again." Walker said it again. Boone stood up from the equipment crate he had been sitting on and walked to the wall and put both of his hands flat against it and stood there for a moment with his back to the room. Maya had not known what name to expect. She had told herself she was prepared for a significant name, someone high, someone trusted, someone whose betrayal would damage the institution in ways that would take years to repair. She had prepared herself for impact. She had not prepared herself for this specific name because this specific name was someone she had met. Someone who had shaken her hand at a briefing 6 weeks ago and told her that her father's reputation preceded her and that he was certain she would represent that reputation well. Someone who had looked her in the eye and lied with the complete confidence of a person who had been lying for a very long time and had never once been caught. "The documentation," she said. Her voice was completely steady. She was very far inside the still water. "How solid is it?" "It's solid," Walker said. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the screen with the expression of a man who was recalculating an enormous number of things simultaneously. "Kane built this to be prosecutable. This isn't intelligence. This is a case file." "He knew what we'd need," Reed said. "He built it for prosecution," Walker said, "which means at some level, whatever else he is, whatever else he's done, he built this to end in accountability. Or he built it to create chaos," Torres said from the back of the room. "We should consider that. Kane feeds us a drive full of names and sends us chasing our own people while Al-Karim moves on his real timeline." It was a reasonable point and everyone in the room knew it. Maya looked at Torres directly. "The Al-Karim intelligence on the drive," she said. "Can we verify any of it independently in the next 2 hours without touching the normal reporting chain?" Quan, who had been quiet until this moment, spoke up. "The location he gives for Al-Karim, I can cross-reference against satellite imagery that came through a parallel collection program. I have access to that archive. It doesn't go through the compromised chain." "Do it," Walker said immediately. Quan moved to the laptop, 4 minutes of silence while he worked navigating systems with the focus of someone who knows exactly what they're looking for. Then he stopped. "Walker," he said, "tell me. The location on the drive matches imagery from 72 hours ago. Al-Karim is where Kane said he is." Quan looked up. "The drive is real." The room absorbed this, which meant the names were real, which meant the 3rd name was real. Walker straightened. He made the decision in the way that serious commanders make the decisions that define their careers, not quickly, not slowly, but at exactly the speed the situation required. "We need to get this to someone we trust outside the compromised chain. Completely outside. Not a superior, not a peer in this community." He looked at Reed. "I need a name." Reed was quiet for 3 seconds. "Inspector General's office. There's an investigator named Hargrove. I've worked with her. She's clean. I'd bet everything I have on it. She's not in the operational chain. She reports independently. And she has the authority to open a criminal referral without going through anyone on that list. You have a way to reach her that doesn't touch base communications." "Personal cell," Reed said. "I have her personal cell. Use it, right now. Walker looked around the room. Nobody in this room discusses what we've seen with anyone outside this room until Hargrove confirms receipt. Not your bunkmate, not your immediate supervisor, not anyone you trust. The trust perimeter is this room. He made eye contact with each person individually. Understood. 7 voices confirmed. Reed stepped into the corner and made the call. The room waited. This was the hardest kind of waiting. Not the patient meditative waiting that Maya had inherited from her father and spent her career perfecting, but the acute pressurized waiting that came from having done everything right up to this moment and now needing someone else to receive it properly. The kind of waiting where you had no control and the stakes were everything. Reed was on the call for 6 minutes. When he turned back to the room, his face had settled into something that was not quite relief, but was adjacent to it. She's secure, he said. She's pulling the thread right now. She says do not transmit the drive through any channel she's sending a courier tonight. Someone she personally vouches for who will take physical possession. He paused. She also said, and I'm quoting exactly that, she has been looking for a way into this for 8 months and she never found the door. "Was the door," Maya said. "Kane built the door," Reed said, "and then he handed you the key." Walker looked at Maya. The question now is Kane himself. He has operational intelligence. He has been working with Al-Karim. Whatever his motivations for the drive, whatever he told you on that ridge, he is still a threat. "He told me to come for him," Maya said. "He said he was counting on it." "That's either arrogance or an invitation," Walker said. "With Kane, it's probably both," Reed said. Maya looked at the metal case sitting on the equipment shelf. Empty now, the drive and the laptop. She thought about the man she had watched walk away across the mountain, the smooth, unhurried movement of someone who had been preparing for every possible outcome. She thought about what he had said about her father, about the timeline being accelerated, about the people on the drive being responsible. She had carried the question of her father's death in a way that she had not even fully admitted to herself, the feeling that had sat underneath her grief for 14 months, quiet and persistent, that something about it was not right. That the man she knew who had survived 3 decades of things that should have killed him had gone from a manageable diagnosis to gone in a period that the doctors had called aggressive, even by the standards of the disease. She had told herself she was imagining it. She had been right, and she had told herself she was imagining it because the alternative was a thing she could not pursue without proof. Now she had proof. 3 names on a drive. One of them someone who had looked her in the eye. She was not going to let herself feel the full weight of that in this room. Not yet. The weight was real, and it was going to be there when she was ready for it. Right now, the work had to come first, because her father had taught her that the work always came first, and because the work was, in this case, the only path to the kind of justice that her father would have recognized and respected. "Walker," she said. "Bennett. Al-Karim's timeline on the drive, how short is it?" Walker checked the screen. 11 days. "And his target?" "The target is a specific individual," Walker said carefully. "A public official. The method is a long-range shot from a position that his people have been preparing for 6 weeks," he paused. "Now that we know I can confirm a sniper with this capability exists on the American side, he's adjusting. He's going to move up the timeline. Because he can't risk us stopping it," Reed said. "He thinks we confirmed the kill and went home," Maya said. "He thinks the mission is closed. He doesn't know about the drive." She looked at Walker. "How long before he finds out the mission is not what he thought it was?" Walker considered this. "Kane will report something to Al-Karim. That's unavoidable. The question is what he reports and when." "Kane wants Al-Karim stopped," Maya said. "That's what the drive is for. He won't report anything that helps Al-Karim accelerate." "You trust him on that," Torres said, and his skepticism was not unreasonable. On that specific point, Maya said yes. Everything Kane told me was structured around one outcome. The intelligence on that drive reaching someone who could act on it. Helping Al-Karim move faster would destroy the value of everything he just did. "He could be playing a longer game," Torres said. "He's been playing a longer game for 3 years," Maya said. "The game ends with Al-Karim stopped and the people who corrupted the intelligence community exposed. That's what he built. That's what he handed over." She paused. "I'm not saying trust Kane. I'm saying understand what he wants. Those are different things." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Boone turned away from the wall. He had been standing there for several minutes with his back to the room, and when he turned, his face had the look of someone who has settled something internal. The public official, Boone said, the one Al-Karim is targeting. 11 days. He looked at Walker. Do we know if this person has been warned through any channel? Not yet, Walker said. That's part of what Hargrove is going to initiate. 11 days isn't much clearance, Boone said. No, Walker said, it's not. And if Al-Karim moves up the timeline because something spooked him, then 11 days becomes less, Maya said, which means everything moves faster than it should. Walker made the decision that commanders make when they have incomplete information and a closing window and no good options, only the least bad one. We stay dark on the base tonight. We maintain the fiction that this mission is complete. In the morning, Hargrove's courier arrives. We transfer the drive. We let Hargrove move through proper channels with proper authority while we stay in position to respond if Al-Karim changes his timeline. He looked at the room. Questions. Nobody had questions. They had concerns, most of them, but concerns and questions were different things, and everyone in the room understood the difference. The meeting broke. People moved in ones and twos back to their quarters, carrying the weight of what they'd seen on the drive, in the particular way that soldiers carry things, not showing it in their faces, not showing it in their posture, just carrying it because carrying things was part of the work. Reed held back. So did Maya. When the room was empty except for them, Reed sat on the equipment crate that Boone had vacated and looked at her with the expression of someone who has decided to say the thing they have been not saying. Your father, he said, what Kane told you, the timeline being accelerated. Yes. Are you okay? It was a simple question, and she had a dozen sophisticated ways to answer it. The professional deflection, the tactical. Reframe the honest but contained response that acknowledged the question without derailing the work. She knew all of those answers. She had been using them for 14 months. She looked at Reed and she said, not entirely, no. He nodded. He didn't push. He didn't offer comfort that would feel cheap given what she was carrying. He just received the honest answer the way her father had taught her honest answers should be received with silence and without judgment. I was proud of you, Reed said after a moment. The 2 weeks he spent training me, he talked about you twice. Not often, he wasn't the kind of man who talked about personal things readily. But twice, Reed looked at the floor. He said you were going to do something remarkable. He said it with the certainty of someone who had already done the math. Maya felt something move through her chest that she was not going to let become visible in this room. He did the math on everything, she said. He did. Reed stood up. Get some sleep if you can. Tomorrow is going to require everything you have. He left. Maya stood alone in the storage room for a minute. She looked at the laptop. The drive was still in it. Its files opened the 3 names visible on the screen. She looked at the 3rd name. She thought about this handshake. The office. The words spoken with the fluency of a man who had been performing trustworthiness for so long that it had stopped being a performance and become simply a language he spoke natively. She thought about her father in the VA hospital. She thought about the last clear thing he had said, you know when to wait, don't let them rush you. And she thought about whether he had known at the end that the waiting he was asking her to do was for this exact thing, for a drive, in a room, and a name on a screen. She thought about Kane walking away across the mountain. Come for me, he had said. I'm counting on it. She closed the laptop. She was not finished with Victor Kane. That much was clear. Whatever he had done, he had handed her something real, at a cost she did not fully understand yet, and the accounting for that, what it meant, what it required of her, was going to take time she did not currently have. But the drive was real, the names were real, the timeline was 11 days and possibly shrinking. She picked up the laptop and carried it with her. In the hallway outside the storage room, Delacroix was standing against the wall. She had not left with the others. She was standing there with her arms crossed and her face carrying an expression that was not easy to read until you understood that Delacroix's face operated in a register most people missed because they were looking for the obvious signals. She was furious. Not at Maya, not at anyone in the room. She was carrying the specific fury of someone who has just learned that the institution they dedicated their life to was violated by people inside it, and that the violation cost something irreplaceable. He was good to you, Delacroix said. She meant Maya's father. He was everything, Maya said. Delacroix nodded once. Then we do this right, all the way through. whatever it takes. Maya looked at her. All the way through, she said. They walked down the hallway together, carrying the weight of 11 days and 3 names and a drive full of things that were going to change everything. Behind them in the empty storage room, the metal case sat on the shelf with its lock open and its contents gone, waiting to be useful in some other way, to some other person, in some other moment of a war that never entirely ended and never entirely began, and just continued the way serious things continue past the point where anyone expected them to stop. The courier arrived at 0340 hours, not the time they had expected. Hargrove had said tonight, and Reed had understood tonight to mean something reasonable late evening, perhaps midnight at the outer edge. Instead, the knock on the storage room door came in the deep middle of the night when the base was at its quietest and the handful of people still moving through the corridors were doing so for reasons that had nothing to do with what was happening in this particular room. Walker opened the door. The courier was a woman in civilian clothes who showed no identification and offered no name and made no small talk. She held out her hand. Walker placed the laptop in it. They had agreed with Hargrove that the physical drive and the laptop both would transfer, leaving nothing on the base that could be found copied or traced. The woman looked at the laptop, looked at Walker, gave a single nod, and was gone. 40 seconds start to finish. Reed had been watching from the corner. When the door closed, he said, "Hargrove moved faster than I expected." "Hargrove is scared," Walker said. "That's not a criticism. Scared and smart is appropriate for what she's holding." Maya had been awake for the full 40 seconds and for the 4 hours before them. She had not slept. She had sat in the chair against the wall with her back straight and her hands in her lap and her mind working through the problem the way her father had taught her to work through problems in the field, not circling, not revisiting, but advancing, taking what was known, identifying what was not known, determining what the next actionable step was, and then waiting with complete patience for the moment when that step became possible. What she knew, the drive was real. The timeline was 11 days or less. 3 names had been confirmed. Hargrove was moving, and Victor Kane was somewhere in the mountains, with information she did not have full access to. What she did not know whether Al-Karim had been warned that something went wrong on the ridge, how quickly he would move if he sensed exposure, and what Kane's next action would be now that the drive had changed hands. The actionable step that she had been waiting for arrived at 0612 hours in the form of a message that Reed received on the personal cell number he had used to reach Hargrove. He read it once, looked up, and handed the phone to Walker without saying anything. Walker read it. His jaw tightened in the specific way that Maya had come to understand meant he was controlling a reaction rather than suppressing one. There was a difference, and the difference mattered, and Walker was a man who always knew the difference. He handed the phone to Maya. The message from Hargrove was 7 sentences long. In those 7 sentences, she communicated the following. The drive had been received and verified, preliminary authentication of the documentation confirmed. It was not fabricated. The first 2 names were being processed through a parallel channel that bypassed the compromised chain, and the third name, the one that had made Boone put his hands against the wall and stand there in silence, had already taken action. Not to flee, not to destroy evidence, to accelerate. Hargrove's message used the word accelerate with 2 exclamation points behind it, which was the first time Maya had ever seen a federal investigator use exclamation points in a communication, and which told her everything she needed to know about how seriously Hargrove was taking what she had found. The third name had, in the hours since the drive was delivered, made contact with Al-Karim's network through a channel that Hargrove's team had been monitoring for a different reason entirely, and had therefore captured in real time. The contact was brief, the content was sparse, but the meaning was unambiguous. He had told them the drive existed. He did not know exactly what was on it. He could not have known because he was not in the storage room and the laptop had not touched any network system. But he knew something had happened on the mountain. He knew Kane had made contact. He knew the timeline was compromised. Al-Karim now knew all of this too. Maya handed the phone back to Reed. She did not say anything for a moment. She looked at the wall and did the math that needed to be done. 11 days just became something shorter, she said. How much shorter? Walker said. It was not a question. He already knew the answer. If Al-Karim got the message in the past 2 hours, and he's the kind of operational commander the drive says he is, and he is Kane's documentation on his decision-making pattern is extensive, then he moves within 24 hours of feeling exposed. She looked at Walker. He either abandons the operation entirely or he accelerates to the point where we cannot intercept. Which does he choose? He doesn't abandon, Maya said. He's been building this for 8 months. The target, the position, the preparation. He doesn't walk away from that. He compresses. She paused. He compresses and he moves, and if the person he's targeting doesn't have protective coverage already in place. Hargrove is working on that, Reed said. The warning to the target's security detail. Hargrove is working through proper channels, Maya said. Proper channels have the third name in them. Not at the top, not everywhere, but somewhere. Al-Karim's network did not survive this long because their intelligence was slow. She looked at Walker directly. Commander, if Al-Karim compresses his timeline to the next 48 hours, Hargrove's channel may be too slow. Walker stood very still. What are you saying, Bennett? I'm saying Kane's documentation gives us Al-Karim's intended firing position, Maya said. We have the location. We have the geometry. We know what the shot looks like from the shooter's end. She let the implications sit for exactly the right amount of time. We don't need Hargrove to move the target. We need to be at the position before Al-Karim's shooter is. Reed said that is not a sanctioned operation. No, Maya said, it isn't. We have no current orders that cover this. Our mission is officially closed. We are technically in post-operation stand-down. Yes, Reed looked at Walker. Walker looked at Maya. Talk me through it, Walker said. She had been building it in her head for the past 4 hours, and she laid it out now the way her father had taught her to lay out a plan, not with enthusiasm, not with persuasion, but with clarity. Every piece visible, every risk named, every assumption labeled as an assumption rather than a fact. The target was a senior American diplomatic official currently in Kabul for a series of meetings that were on the public schedule, which was how Al-Karim had been able to plan around it. The intended firing position per the documentation Kane had compiled was a specific building at a specific distance. Kane had included enough detail that Reed, cross-referencing against his own knowledge of the city's geography, could identify the building with high confidence. The shot geometry required a shooter with exceptional capability, which was why Al-Karim had needed to know that Maya existed and could make the 247-meter shot. He was not matching her capability. He was confirming that the Americans had it and therefore assessing whether they could counter his. His shooter was good. Kane's documentation rated them specifically, not Maya's level, close enough. If we're at the building before his shooter, Maya said, we control the position. His shooter arrives and finds the position occupied by American operators. Best case, they abort. Worst case. You're there when they arrive, Walker said. Yes, sir. And you're asking me to authorize an unsanctioned operation in Kabul based on intelligence from a man who has been working with our enemies for 7 years. Based on intelligence from a man who spent 3 years building a case file and handed it to us at personal risk, Maya said. The intelligence has been partially verified by Kwan's satellite cross-reference and by Hargrove's authentication. The partial verification is not complete verification. I know that. But you believe it. I believe the math works, she said. And I believe if we wait for full authorization through channels that are partially compromised, we lose the window. Walker turned and looked at Reed. Reed said, I believe the math works too. I hate everything about the situation we're in, and I believe the math works. Walker was quiet for 10 seconds. The kind of 10 seconds that contained an enormous amount of thinking compressed into a very small space. Boone, he said. Boone had been in the corner. He straightened. Sir, get Torres and Kwan quietly. We are not filing movement orders through base operations. We are making a logistics request through a support channel I have direct access to that does not touch the normal chain. Walker looked at Maya. You have 4 hours to get us to Kabul. Can you do that? Hargrove's courier used a channel that's still warm, Maya said. I can ask Reed to reach her. She has assets that move faster than base logistics. Do it, Walker said. Reed was already on the phone. The next 4 hours moved at a pace that stood in absolute contrast to the patient, methodical tempo of everything that had preceded them. This was the other gear, the one that serious operators shifted into when the window was closing and the variables were compressing and patience had completed its work and given way to action. Hargrove provided the transport. She did not ask for explanations over the phone. Reed gave her 3 words: position, cobble tonight, and she gave him a location and a time and disconnected. They were 7 people moving through a forward operating base at 0700 hours on a morning when they were supposed to be in post-operation stand-down, carrying personal weapons and minimal equipment, in a piece of information that was worth more than anything else on the base, and that existed now only in their heads because the physical drive was in Hargrove's possession and the laptop had gone with it and there was nothing left to find. Delacroix moved alongside Maya through the corridor. She had said almost nothing since the storage room meeting, but she had been present for every significant moment, since which Maya had come to understand was Delacroix's way of communicating commitment. She did not make speeches. She showed up. The shooter Al-Karim is using, Delacroix said quietly, matching Maya's pace. Kane's documentation doesn't name them. It gives a designation, Maya said. Not a full identity. Someone Kane trained according to the file, 2 years ago in a different context. So Kane knows their capability better than we do. Yes, and their capability is close to yours. Kane's assessment says close, Maya said. I don't know how much weight to give that. Kane's assessments are thorough, but they're also his assessments. He has reasons to want me to take this seriously that go beyond pure accuracy. I want you focused, Delacroix said. He wants me sharp, Maya corrected. There's a distinction. Focused can mean narrow. Sharp means everything is available to you and you're using all of it. Delacroix considered this. Her father teach you that in about 11 different ways over about 15 years, Maya said. The transport Hargrove provided was not military. It was a civilian contractor aircraft that operated in and out of the region for logistical purposes that were not fully explained to the people who used it and which had the significant advantage of not appearing on any military flight manifest. They were in the air by 0820 hours. The flight was 1 hour and 40 minutes. Maya spent the first 40 minutes running calculations. Not sniper calculations, she would do those when she had the physical position in front of her. These were situational calculations. If Al-Karim had received the warning at approximately 0200, and if his decision-making pattern followed the profile Kane had documented, and if he had a pre-existing compressed timeline protocol, which Kane's documentation suggested he did, then his shooter was probably already moving toward the Kabul position, possibly already there. She said this to Walker at the 50-minute mark of the flight. If they're already at the position, Walker said, we don't have a setup. We have a direct confrontation. Yes, sir. 7 people against a prepared shooter with local support. Possibly, she said. Kane's documentation says the shooter operates with minimal support. 2 people maximum, their specialty. They don't like crowds. Kane told you that specifically. It's in the documentation, the shooter profile section. She paused. Kane was very thorough about the people he trained. He knew their habits, their preferences. He knew them the way a teacher knows students they paid close attention to. Or the way a handler knows assets, Torres said from 2 seats back. Yes, Maya said. Both things can be true. Walker looked out the window of the aircraft, not seeing anything, just giving his mind a direction to face while it worked. If we reach the position and the shooter is already there, he said, what's your read on how they respond? They abort if they're smart, Maya said. 7 American operators appearing at their firing position with no warning tells them the intelligence is burned and the operation is over. A professional aborts. And if they're not entirely rational about it, then we have a fight in an enclosed space against someone who is very good at their specific thing, she said, which is not ideal, but it's manageable if we're structured right. How do you want to structure it? Reed and I take the primary approach to the firing position. Boone, Torres, Kwan hold the building entry points, Delacroix on communication running, Hargrove updates in real time. She looked at Walker. You coordinate. You're the one person who can make a judgment call if the situation changes faster than our plan accounts for. Walker nodded slowly. One problem, Reed said from across the aisle. He had been listening without appearing to listen, which was a skill Maya had noticed he possessed in abundance. We don't have current eyes on the position. We know the building from Kane's documentation. We don't know the current state of the building, who's in it, whether the shooter has been there long enough to have set something up. Hargrove, Walker said. Reed was already on the phone for the 3rd time in 4 hours. He spoke briefly, listened, spoke again, and hung up. She has a local asset, Reed said. Someone in the building management of the adjacent structure. She's requesting a visual check right now. He paused. She said something else. Tell me, Walker said. The third name moved again in the past hour. He made a second contact with Al-Karim's network. This one was longer. Hargrove's team got a partial content capture. Reed looked at his phone. He read it. Then he looked up at Maya with an expression that shifted the temperature of the aircraft by several degrees. He gave them your name, Maya. He told them that the specialist who made the ridge shot is moving. He told them where you're going. The aircraft was quiet for a moment. Then Boone said from the back, in the flattest possible voice, "So now the shooter knows we're coming." "Yes," Maya said, "which means they don't abort." "No," she said, "they don't." The math had just changed. Not the destination, not the objective, but the geometry of what waited at the other end. A shooter who knew you were coming was a fundamentally different problem than a shooter you surprised. It removed the possibility of simple resolution. It transformed the position from a firing location into something that had been in the past 60 minutes converted into a trap. Walker looked at Maya. She looked back at him. "We still go," she said. "I know we still go," he said. "I'm working out what we go into. A prepared position with a shooter who has been told I'm coming and who has been assessed by the person who trained them as close to my capability." She said it plainly. "Someone who knows I'm going to come through that door and has had 60 minutes to decide how they want that to go." What does 60 minutes give them? Sightlines to the entry, possibly a secondary position in case the primary is compromised. Certainly a retreat route that they have identified and probably prepared. She paused. "And a choice." "What choice?" "Whether to be there when we arrive or whether to execute the primary mission before we reach them." She let that sit. The target is 40 minutes from now if Al-Karim moved up the schedule. The position gives them access in the next 45 minutes. If the shooter decides that completing the mission matters more than surviving contact with us, they take the shot first, Torres said. "Yes." "Can they do it in 40 minutes, Walker said. "If they're already set up?" Maya said yes. The aircraft banked, slightly beginning its approach pattern. 38 minutes to landing. Ground transport from the airfield to the building, call it 12 minutes if the route was clear. That left 26 minutes of approach entry in position before the window opened. It was not comfortable math. Walker made a decision. Hargrove, right now. She needs to reach the target's security detail through whatever channel she has that is completely isolated from the third name's access. The target needs to move. Not be warned to move, Turkey. Physically change location in the next 30 minutes. Reed was calling before Walker finished the sentence. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, Reed's face told the story before his words did. Hargrove reached the detail, he said. The lead agent received the warning. He's moving the target now. He paused. But the agent said something. He said they received a conflicting advisory 20 minutes ago through official channels telling them the threat assessment for today was reduced and current security posture was adequate. The silence in the aircraft was total. "Official channels," Walker said. "The third name," Maya said. The third name had not just warned Al-Karim. He had used his position to neutralize the target's security response before the threat materialized. He had told the security detail the danger was lower. He had cleared the way. Walker closed his eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When he opened them, the calculation was complete. Hargrove's agent is physically moving the target regardless of the conflicting advisory, Walker said. "Yes," Reed said. He said, and I'm quoting, he said that when a federal investigator with IG authority calls his personal cell at this hour and tells him to move, he moves, and he asks questions later. "Good man," Boone said. "The target is moving," Reed said. "But the shooter doesn't know that yet. They're still set up for a shot that is no longer going to present itself. Which makes them dangerous in a different way," Maya said. "A shooter who has been told their target was compromised by approaching operators, who knows I'm coming, who has prepared a position and who now learns the shot is gone." She looked at Walker. "They have one objective left." Walker understood immediately. "You." "The mission from the beginning was about me," Maya said. "Al-Karim needed the data point. Yeah, he got it on the mountain. Now he has a second opportunity not to eliminate a diplomatic target, but to eliminate the capability that threatens his future operations." She felt the aircraft descend further. If I were running their operation right now, I would redirect. The primary mission is burned. The secondary objective is standing in front of you. You're the target now, Torres said. I've been the target since Kane described the 247-meter shot to Al-Karim 8 months ago, Maya said. The mountain was always about this. 22 minutes to landing. Walker looked at Reed. Reed looked at Maya. The silent communication between the three of them in those 2 seconds contained more information than most conversations managed in an hour. We restructure, Walker said. We are no longer securing a firing position. We are engaging a prepared shooter who has been redirected against a specific individual. He looked at Maya, which means you are no longer part of the assault element. You are the principal we are protecting. No, Maya said immediately. Bennett. With respect, Commander, no. She kept her voice level, but the word was not negotiable. I am the only person in this group who has been assessed against this shooter's capability. I am the only person who knows how they think because I have read Kane's profile of them 3 times in the past 4 hours, and I understand how they were trained because I understand how Kane trains. She looked at him. You protect me by letting me work. Putting me behind the team puts a variable at the center of the geometry that the shooter can use. Putting me in front means I'm reading the same situation they are. She's right, Reed said quietly. Walker held her gaze. If this goes wrong, he said. It won't, she said. You can't know that. I know the math, she said, and the math works. The aircraft touched down. The ground transport was waiting Hargrove again. Resources appearing at the right moment with the precision of someone who had been building toward this moment for 8 months and was finally in the part of the operation where the preparation paid off. 12 minutes in the vehicle. Nobody spoke. Maya sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes open and her mind in the still water, that deep and absolute internal quiet that her father had given her and that she had spent 28 years learning to inhabit completely. She thought about Kane somewhere in the mountains waiting for whatever came next. She thought about the third name in an office somewhere, realizing that his warnings had not been fast enough, that the machine had been set in motion by a drive he had not been able to stop, that the walls were closing. She thought about her companions at the kitchen table, patient and precise, spreading maps across the wood and saying the things that needed to be said, because the time for saying them was finite, and he had understood that before anyone else. The vehicle stopped. Walker looked at her. She looked back. Ready, he said. She thought about everything. The ridge, the shot, the valley going quiet, Kane's voice in the cold air, the drive, the name, the phone call that moved a target out of a line of fire that was already being drawn. She thought about 31 minutes of stillness that everyone had mistaken for hesitation, and that was actually the most active thing she had ever done. I've been ready, she said, for 14 months. She got out of the vehicle. The building was in front of them. Somewhere inside it, a shooter who knew her name and knew her capability and had been told she was coming was waiting in a prepared position with a rifle and a redirected mission, in the specific focused intention of someone who understood that the window was closing and the choice had already been made. Maya checked her weapon. She breathed. She moved forward. The building had 6 floors and the shooter was on the 5th. Maya knew this before they entered. Not because the documentation told her Kane's file had identified the firing position as 5th floor northeast corner, which she had memorized on the aircraft, but because when she stood at the base of the building and looked up, she felt the geometry of it the way her father had taught her to feel geometry. The angle of the sight line to the target's last known position. The wind coming off the adjacent structure from the northwest. The way a disciplined shooter would read all of this and make the same calculation she was making right now from the opposite direction. 5th floor, northeast corner, 2nd window from the end. Reed came up beside her. He had done the same calculation. He looked at the same window. He said nothing because there was nothing to say that the shared look didn't already communicate. Walker had the team positioned in under 90 seconds. Boone and Torres on the ground level entry points, east and west. Quan on the stairwell access from the building's rear. Delacroix outside maintaining the communication link to Hargrove, whose voice was a steady presence in their earpieces, confirming that the target was still moving, still clear, still alive. Reed and Maya took the front entry. The building was not empty. It was a mixed-use structure, commercial tenants on the lower floors, some residential above. And at this hour, there were people in it which was a complication that added weight to every decision about how fast to move and how much noise to make, and what the cost of a mistake looked like in human terms, that extended beyond their immediate tactical picture. They moved through the ground floor with the controlled urgency of people who needed to be fast without being loud. Maya kept her breathing even. She counted the steps to the stairwell without counting them consciously, the way you do when a skill has been drilled deep enough that it lives below the level of deliberate thought. She thought about the shooter on the fifth floor. Kane's profile had given her a name, not a full name, a designation, the kind of operational identifier that intelligence files used when full identity was uncertain. The designation was Tariq. Kane's assessment of Tariq covered 2 pages and was written with the particular intimacy of a teacher, describing a gifted student, not warmly but precisely, with the specific knowledge that came from having spent significant time watching someone develop. Tariq was 29 years old, 1 year older than Maya. Kane had trained him for 8 months in a context that the documentation described without fully explaining, and in those 8 months, Kane had assessed him as the finest student and he had worked with since. And here Kane had stopped the sentence and started a new paragraph. And Maya had understood exactly what the unfinished sentence would have said. Since Daniel Bennett. Tariq was not Maya. Kane had been clear about that, but Kane had also been clear that the gap between them was smaller than any gap Maya had encountered in her career, and that Tariq had something she needed to account for, a particular quality of aggression in his shooting that Kane described as willingness to accept imperfect conditions and fire anyway. Where Maya waited for the moment, Tariq pushed toward it. 2 different philosophies, both effective, extremely dangerous in combination, which was not a combination that applied here. But the contrast was relevant because it told her how he would respond to the situation he was currently in. He would not wait. He was already doing something. She understood this at the second floor landing, not from any external signal, but from the internal logic of everything Kane had written about him. Tariq had been told his primary shot was gone. He had been told Maya was coming. He had 60+ minutes of preparation time. A shooter who pushed toward imperfect conditions rather than waiting for perfect ones would not spend that time sitting still in a corner position watching the door. He would be moving. She grabbed Reed's arm. They stopped on the second floor landing. He's not at the 5th floor position, she said quietly. Reed looked at her. He's been mobile since he got the redirect, she said. Kane described him as someone who attacks problems. Sitting in a fixed position, waiting for me to come through the door, is not attacking the problem. It's defending a position, and Tariq doesn't defend. Then where is he? She thought about it the way her father had taught her to think about it, not starting from where she wanted the answer to be, but starting from the other person's perspective and following their logic forward. Tariq had been redirected. His primary mission was gone. His new objective was her. He knew she was approaching the building. He knew her capability. He had studied her the same way she had studied him. Kane would have made sure of that, because Kane prepared his students thoroughly. What would she do if she were Tariq? She would not wait in the position the enemy expected her to occupy. She would find a different angle. The building across the street, she said. Reed processed this for approximately 1 second. He went mobile before we arrived. He repositioned to an adjacent structure where he has a sight line to our entry point. We've been in his sight line since we came through the front door, Maya said. The stillness that followed that sentence lasted exactly as long as it needed to, long enough for both of them to absorb it, not long enough to let it become fear. Reed keyed his radio. Walker, change of picture. Shooter is not in this building. Adjacent structure, our entry side. We've been exposed since arrival. Walker's voice came back in 4 words. Everyone moved to cover. The next 8 seconds were controlled chaos. 7 people who understood immediately what the instruction meant, executing it with the efficiency of training that had been drilled past the point of conscious thought. Boone and Torres moved inside and away from the entry glass. Quan pressed into the stairwell interior. Delacroix dropped behind the vehicle outside. Maya and Reed were already moving up the stairwell, not because it was the safe direction, but because the stairwell was the only space in their immediate vicinity where the geometry protected them from a line of fire coming from across the street. Walker's voice again. Bennett, he has your entry on camera if he repositioned. He saw you come in. I know, she said. He knows you know. I know that too, she said. Reed looked at her in the dim stairwell. He repositioned to take you at the entry. You didn't come out the entry. He's adjusting right now. Yes. Where does he adjust to? She thought about Tariq, about the profile, about the quality of aggression Kane had described. Not recklessness, not emotional aggression, but the tactical kind, the kind that came from a fundamental belief that movement was always better than stillness when a position was compromised. Tariq would not stay in the building across the street. The building across the street was where she expected him to be, and Tariq had read Kane's notes on her the same way she had read Kane's notes on him. I knew she would figure it out, which meant he was already moving again. He's coming here, she said. Reed stared at her. Into the building. He's going to close the distance, she said. He understands that sitting at range against me is a disadvantage because my capability at range is what the entire operation was built around. The way he neutralizes my advantage is to remove the distance. She paused. He's coming in close. This becomes a different kind of fight. Reed keyed the radio again. All elements, shooter is mobile and may be approaching our building. Switch from exterior observation to interior defense. He's coming to us. Boone's voice on the radio, copy. We have the ground entry covered. Torres east entry covered. Quan's stairwell rear is clear. For now. Delacroix Hargrove says target is secured out of the area. She's asking for our status. Walker, tell her our status is complicated. Maya was already thinking past the stairwell. If Tariq was moving toward the building, the question was not whether he would get inside a determined professional with local knowledge and preparation time, would get inside a mixed-use civilian building that was simply true, but where he would choose to engage. Not the ground floor. Too many variables, too many civilians, too much chaos that worked against precision. Not the fifth floor, which was now burned as a position. He would pick something between something that gave him a confined approach channel, where his specific quality of aggression and his willingness to engage at imperfect range gave him the advantage. The third floor. She did not know why she was certain. She just was. The same way she had been certain about the 31-minute hold on the mountain ridge. The same way she had known the decoy was a decoy before the shot confirmed the kill. The certainty was not mystical, it was the accumulation of everything she knew processed at a speed below conscious thought and presented to her as a conclusion that felt like instinct, but was actually just math. She couldn't see herself doing. Third floor, she said to Reed. We go up. You want to go toward him. I want to choose the ground, she said. He's coming to us because he thinks close range neutralizes my advantage. I'm going to meet him on the ground I choose before he can choose it himself. Reed looked at her for 2 full seconds. Your father, he said, would have made exactly this call. I know, she said. Let's go. They moved up. Walker's voice in her ear. Bennett, talk to me. Third floor, she said. Reed and I are establishing position. Keep everyone else on entry control. If Tariq is inside already, he came through a point your people cover. I need to know the moment anyone sees movement. Understood. Boone Torres Quan, you heard her. I need eyes on every entry point, and I need reports the second something moves. The third floor was the kind of space that had been used for something and was now between uses empty in the specific way that commercial space is empty when the tenants have left and the next tenants have not arrived, which meant open floors and interior columns and the kind of sight lines that were simultaneously useful and dangerous, depending on which side of them you occupied. Maya moved to the northeast side of the floor. Reed took up a position at the stairwell entry. They did not. The communication between them at this point was positional, where each person was relative to the geometry which they both understood and which required no words. 40 seconds of silence. Then Torres on the radio, movement, ground level west entry, single individual, civilian clothes. He's inside. Walker description. Torres male medium build 30s, moving like he knows where he's going. Maya closed her eyes for 1 second. When she opened them, she said, that's him. Walker, Torres, do not engage. Let him move. Everyone hold. The silence on the radio had a particular texture, 7 people breathing and not speaking and tracking a single variable moving through a space they all occupied. Quan, he bypassed the ground stairwell. He's going for the service elevator. Reed quietly to Maya. He doesn't want the stairwell. He knows we'd have the stairwell. He's taking the elevator to cut floors, she said. He'll get off one floor below or above where he wants to be and use a secondary stairwell. Walker, Quan, can you see the elevator indicator? Quan, it's moving. Second floor. Third floor, it stopped. Maya moved. She moved away from the northeast position and toward the central corridor, placing herself where the secondary stairwell exit opened onto the main floor. She moved without sound and without hurry, the particular quality of movement that her father had called intentional, not fast, not slow, but exactly as fast as the situation required, and no faster because faster than necessary was noise and noise was information given to the wrong person. Reed shifted to cover her new position from the stairwell entry. The secondary stairwell door was 12 feet in front of her. She stood to the side of it, not in front of it. Her father had taught her in one of the early sessions behind the house in Oceanside, when she was young enough that the lesson felt abstract, that the most dangerous place to stand was the place the other person expected you to stand. The door opened outward. Anyone coming through it would expect opposition to be centered on the door. She was to the left in the shadow of the structural column, at an angle that put her outside the immediate field of view of someone moving fast through an unfamiliar space. She controlled her breathing. She heard the door handle. The door opened. Tariq came through moving fast and low and immediately went right the opposite direction from Maya, which was tactically sound and would have worked against almost anyone else, and was the clearest possible confirmation that he was exactly as good as Kane's profile had said he was. He checked right, found nothing, began, his pivot left. Maya already had the angle. She did not shoot. She said in a voice that was completely level and completely without aggression, "Stop." Tariq stopped, not because she told him to, because he was a professional who had just processed that. The voice came from a position he had not expected, at an angle that meant she had the geometry and that moving in any direction would make his situation worse rather than better. I was still. His hands were visible. His weapon was in his right hand, pointed at the floor because he had been mid-pivot and the pivot was not completed. They stood like that for approximately 3 seconds. "Put it down," Maya said. Tariq's voice, when it came, was accented and controlled and carried the particular quality of someone who was afraid and was not going to let the fear make their decisions for them. "You are better than Kane described." "He described you well," she said. "Put the weapon down." "If I put the weapon down, what happens next?" "You go home," she said, "alive," which is the only version of this that ends well for either of us. Al-Karim. Al-Karim's operation is over, she said. The intelligence that Kane collected has been in federal hands for 12 hours. The network is being rolled up as we stand here. Whatever Al-Karim promised you, the structure that promise depended on, does not exist anymore. Tariq was quiet for a moment. She watched his hand. The specific relationship between a shooter's hand and their weapon. In a moment like this was something her father had spent hours teaching her to read, because the hand told you things the face was trained to conceal. Tariq's hand was still, not the stillness of someone about to act, the stillness of someone weighing something. "Kane gave you the drive," Tariq said. It was not a question. "Yes." "He told me he might," Tariq said. "He told me if he did, it meant the calculation had changed." He paused. "He told me if the calculation changed, I should listen to Daniel Bennett's daughter." The words landed. Maya absorbed them without moving. Kane had prepared Tariq for this moment, the same way her father had prepared her for every moment that mattered. He had built in a contingency. He had told his student, this young man who had been given a set of skills and pointed in a direction by someone who was himself pointed wrong, that there was a condition under which the direction changed. She thought about what that meant, about the kind of long game thinking it required, about the specific quality of mind that could train someone for violence and simultaneously build in the mechanism of their own de-escalation. She thought about her father saying Kane was the best he had ever worked alongside. She thought about how complicated it was to hold all of that at once. The weapon lowered. It touched the floor. Tariq straightened, slowly, hands visible, and looked at her with the expression of someone who has just made a decision that closes one version of their life and opens another that they cannot yet see clearly. Reed was through the stairwell door in 2 seconds, weapon up, moving to Tariq's position with the efficiency of 16 years. He secured the weapon. He checked Tariq quickly and thoroughly. He stepped back. He looked at Maya. "Clear," he said. She exhaled through her nose. Walker's voice in her ear. "Bennett, report." Shooter is secured, she said. No shots fired. We need a transport and a quiet handoff to Hargrove. He's going to cooperate. A pause, then Walker, in a voice that contained several things simultaneously. Copy that. Well done. Boone's voice came on the radio unprompted. He said two words. Damn right. Torres said nothing, but she heard something in the background of his radio that sounded like it might have been a laugh that he cut off before it fully formed. Quan said extracting to ground level. Delacroix said Hargrove is on the line. She's asking how we want to do the handoff. Life reassembled itself around the moment, the way it always did. The tactical picture expanding back out to logistics and communication in the bureaucratic machinery of consequence. And Maya let it happen around her while she stood in the third-floor corridor of a building in Kabul and breathed. She looked at Tariq. He was sitting against the wall now. Reed's position making escape impossible, but the posture itself not punitive. He was looking at his hands. How long did you work with Kane? She said. He looked up. 8 months. Did you know what he was building, the documentation on the network? Tariq was quiet for a moment. I knew he was collecting. I did not know what he intended to do with it. He paused. I knew he was not what he appeared to be to Al-Karim. I did not know what he actually was. Did you know about my father? The question cost her something to ask. She asked it anyway because the answer mattered and because she had learned from the man she was asking about that the questions that cost something to ask were usually the ones most worth asking. Tariq looked at her steadily. I knew Kane had a history with a Marine colonel. I knew the colonel was important to whatever Kane was doing. I knew the colonel had died. He paused. I did not know the rest. Not what Kane told you on the mountain. I did not know that. She believed him. Not entirely, not unconditionally, but enough. What did Kane tell you about me? She said. Tariq looked at his hands again. He said you would come for him eventually. He said when you did it would be the most dangerous situation he had ever been in. A pause. He said he was looking forward to it. Something in Maya's chest moved and settled. The handoff to Hargrove's people happened at 11:40 hours in the vehicle bay of an adjacent structure that Hargrove had arranged with the quiet efficiency that had characterized every resource she had produced in the past 18 hours. Tariq went with them without resistance and with the specific composure of someone who had decided to cooperate fully and was carrying out that decision. Before the vehicle door closed, he looked at Maya through the window. He said one more thing, Tariq said. About you. She waited. He said your father was right, that you would be better than both of them. The vehicle door closed. Maya stood in the vehicle bay and let that sit inside her for a moment. Not the sentiment, she had heard the sentiment the night before from Reed and had felt it land than the way she felt it land now with the particular grief that lives alongside pride when the person who should hear you succeed is no longer there. She let it sit. She did not push it away. She let it be real. Walker appeared at her shoulder. He stood beside her without speaking for a moment, looking at the space where the vehicle had been. It's done, he said. This part, she said. This part, he agreed. Kane is still out there. Yes. Hargrove is going to want your cooperation on the prosecutions. The 3 names, it's going to be a long process and it's going to be uncomfortable. I know. The 3rd name is going to have lawyers and connections and a version of events that he's been polishing for years, Walker said. He's going to make this difficult. He can try, Maya said. Walker looked at her. You're not worried. Kane built that documentation to be prosecutable, she said. He built it for this exact situation, someone with resources trying to make it disappear. He anticipated every move. She paused. He had 3 years to anticipate. And he's the smartest person I've ever encountered in a professional context, which is a complicated thing to say about someone who crossed every line there is to cross. She looked at Walker. The prosecution holds. Hargrove knows what she's doing. And your father. She was quiet. The accountability for what was done to him, Walker said. Is that on the drive too? Yes, she said. Oh, it's on the drive. Walker nodded. He did not say he was sorry. He had said something equivalent the night before. And he was not the kind of man who repeated himself on things that mattered. He had said it once and meant it completely, and Maya had received it the way it was intended, and that was enough. What do you need, he said. She thought about the question. It was the kind of question that could be answered tactically, debrief, support, documentation. communication channels to Hargrove's process. All of that was true, and all of that would happen. But that was not what Walker was asking, and they both knew it. Time, she said. Eventually. Not now. Now there's work. There's always work, Walker said. Yes, she said. There is. Reed materialized from the direction of the building entry and fell into step beside them as they moved toward the vehicle that would take them back to the airfield. He carried his equipment with the slightly different posture of a man who has been through something and is integrating it as he moves. Quan ran a preliminary on the communications timeline, Reed said. Al-Karim's network went dark 40 minutes ago, all channels simultaneously. He knows it's over, Maya said. Or he's moving to a backup network, Reed said. Both, Walker said. He knows it's over and he's rebuilding. That's what people like Al-Karim do. They rebuild. Then we find him in the rebuild, Maya said. Reed looked at her. You're not done. I was never going to be done after the mountain, she said. The mountain was the beginning. They reached the vehicle. Boone was already there, Taurus beside him, Quan and Delacroix arriving from the other direction. 7 people who had spent the past 20 hours in a situation that had changed shape 6 times and who had adapted to every change without losing the thread that ran through all of it. Boone held the vehicle door. As Maya passed him, he said in the voice of a man who had weighed the words carefully before saying them, Your father would have been proud of today. She stopped. She looked at him. In 20 months of special warfare, she had not once allowed herself to accept that sentence from anyone. She had deflected it, contextualized it, moved past it, with the efficiency of someone who had learned that sentiment in professional settings was a trap that soft people used to stop moving forward. She accepted it now, completely. Thank you, Boone, she said. He nodded once. She got in the vehicle. 3 weeks later, in a conference room in a federal building in Washington that did not appear on any public directory, Maya sat across a table from Hargrove and 2 senior members of the Inspector General's staff and watched the lead attorney for the third name's defense try for the 4th time in 40 minutes to characterize Kane's documentation as the fabricated product of a compromised source. The attorney was skilled. He was also wrong, and Hargrove's team had spent 3 weeks making sure that every element of the documentation could stand independent of Kane's credibility, corroborated through parallel sources, authenticated through technical means, bulletproofed against exactly the arguments being made in this room. Maya had provided her own testimony the day before. She had sat in a different room with different people, and she had told the truth in the precise, complete chronological way that her father had taught her to tell. Things that mattered nothing, she did nothing, softened, nothing omitted. The conversation on the mountain, the drive, the decryption key, Tariq, all of it. When the attorney finished his 4th attempt to undermine the documentation, Hargrove set a single sheet of paper on the table. She did not speak. She let the attorney read it. He read it. His expression changed in the specific way that expressions change when a person is reading something that eliminates the argument they have been making. The sheet was a corroboration summary. 7 independent sources. None of them behind, all of them producing data points that aligned with the documentation on the drive. The third name's contact with Al-Karim's network. The financial transfers. The communications. All of it visible from angles that had nothing to do with Victor Kane. The attorney looked at Hargrove. He looked at Maya. He picked up his phone and called his client. The conversation was short. The third name entered a plea the following morning. Maya was not in the courtroom when it happened. She was at a range in the hills of Virginia, lying behind a rifle in the cold morning air, running the drills her father had designed, the ones she had grown up doing, the ones she had taken into every assignment, the ones that lived in her body so completely that she could do them in her sleep. She was not alone. Reed was there. He had asked 2 days after Kabul if she would be willing to run some sessions, not as an instructor, as a student. He had said it with the particular difficulty of a 16-year veteran asking someone younger and junior for something that required him to set the hierarchy aside. She had said yes immediately. He lay beside her now, working through a hold, and she watched his breathing with the same patient attention her father had given her on the hills above Oceanside, reading the thing beneath the thing, not his technique, which was excellent, but his relationship with the moment, which was what the technique either served or didn't. You're pushing toward the shot, she said. He exhaled. I know. Wait for it. I know. It's not a criticism, she said. It's a reminder. The shot exists. Your job is to be there when it arrives. Reed was quiet for a moment. Then he said, your father used to say something like that. He said it to me approximately 900 times, she said. It took about 850 repetitions before it actually changed how I operated. How many repetitions do I have left? Fewer than you think, she said. He almost smiled. He settled. He breathed. He waited. The shot, when it came, was perfect. Maya watched it through the spotting scope and felt something that was not pride and not grief and not relief, but contained elements of all three. The feeling that comes when the work is real and the work is right, and the people doing the work are doing it for reasons that would hold up in the light. Her father had spent 30 years building something, not a record, not a reputation, not a legacy in the way that word usually meant, but a way of understanding what the skill was for. He had built it in doctrine that bore other people's names and in training sessions at ranges that no longer existed, and in 2 weeks in Nevada with a man who was now lying beside her, and in 15 years of lessons on the hills above Oceanside with a daughter who had carried every one of them into a valley in Afghanistan, in a building in Kabul, in a conference room in Washington. He had built it knowing he might not be there to see it complete. He had built it anyway, because that was what serious people did with the time they had. Maya Bennett lowered the spotting scope. She looked at the range in front of her. She breathed the cold Virginia air. She thought about a drive encrypted with a dead man's service number, about a conversation on a mountain in languages both spoken and unspoken, about a name on a screen that was now a name in a plea agreement, about a young man sitting against a wall in Kabul, deciding that one version of his life was finished. She thought about Victor Kane somewhere preparing for the moment she came for him. Preparing with the patience of someone who understood that preparation was its own form of respect. She thought about her father. She picked up her rifle. The range was open. The morning was cold. The work was real. And Maya Bennett, daughter of Colonel Daniel Bennett, soldier-shooter, the woman who had waited 31 minutes for the only shot that mattered, settled behind the rifle, controlled her breathing, found the still water, and went back to work. Because the greatest warriors were not measured by the distance of their longest shot. They were measured by what they were willing to carry and how far they were willing to carry it, and whether they were still moving when everyone else had stopped. Maya was still moving. She always would be.